Welcome to the Viking Age podcast. It's the official podcast of thevikingage.com. My name is Chris Schad. I write for the Viking Age, Puckett's Pond, and Zone coverage. We do this every Monday with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. Today, we'll talk about the Vikings' chances in securing home field advantage in the NFC, preview Sunday's game against the leaner, meaner, greener Seattle Seahawks. But first, let me introduce my guest from the Wide Left Substack and the Minnesota Football Party. His name is Arif Hasan. Welcome back to the show, Arif.
Thanks for having me.
Now, to the viewers right now, Restream did this thing where they have like icons in the middle. So if I'm going like this to see you just like by default, I apologize. Anybody watching the pod, like, what is he doing? No, I literally, I don't know. My brain's just all over the place. But the good news about my brain is it's focused on a very good football team because the Vikings are 12-2. They're going to Seattle. They're facing the Seahawks on Sunday, and they can get home field advantage in the playoffs. The Vikings have entered they can't keep getting away with it stage with opposing fan bases, but with 3 games left on the schedule, how are you feeling about the Vikings' chances to get home field advantage, Arif?
Pretty good. I don't think that, they're the most likely, to get home field advantage. I still think that's probably going to end up being the Detroit Lions, but I don't think that the Vikings are anywhere near like out of the race or anything like that. Obviously, if the Vikings went out, they're in a really good spot to be able to take home field advantage. The only thing that kind of prevents them from doing that is, if the Eagles also win out, which is, similarly unlikely. And then on top of that, a bunch of the Eagles opponents that the Vikings have not yet faced win their games, and then the Vikings opponents that the Eagles have not yet faced lose. It's complicated. So if the Vikings win out, there's a really, really, really good chance that they get home field advantage throughout the playoffs, which would be nice, plus that all-important bye. But I think that the most likely scenario is that the Vikings are like a 14-win 5 seed or something crazy like that.
See, that's the worst part of it. It's like you look at it and you're like, this team, if it was like 1 or 2, you're probably like, home field advantage, whatever, roll the ball out there. They would be the 5 seed. It's like, then you got to go on the road. Like, you probably got to go on the road 3 times if you're the 5 seed. And it's a massive difference. So like these 3 games, like, you mentioned all the other stuff that other teams have to do, but they have to win these games, I think, if they want a legitimate shot at the Super Bowl, don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, faced with the prospect of like 3 away games in the playoffs, that's just asking, I think, especially against playoff quality teams, I think that's like asking a little bit too much to kind of suggest that that's the most like that's going to get them to the Super Bowl. Possible, of course, always possible. But I just feel like we're kind of on the outside looking in that scenario, even as like a 14-win team or something like that. It would be a really difficult ask. So yeah, I think that home field advantage, and again, if possible, that bye, that's just really that I think is really the key. Like it's going to be so difficult in this particular setup for them to be able to make it otherwise.
And I think too, looking at the bye, it would be a golden opportunity for the Vikings to kind of take a deep breath and gather themselves for this because, Brian O'Neill got banged up. Aaron Jones has had a couple injuries throughout the season. Sam Darnold always seems to be banged up, but it hasn't really stopped him. When you look at these games, you got the Lions, they're 12-2, but their entire defense is hurt now. The Packers are 10-4, but Jordan Love's celebrating Toyota-thon, I guess. Like he's a big Toyota-thon guy and plays better.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I whatever helps you, I guess. It's like Mike Zimmer slashing animals back in 2016? He had the red paint and it was like fat cats get slaughtered and he slit a whole bunch of like
That was incredible.
It's just Jordan Love with Toyotas, I guess. Is there an advantage to playing those teams in the last 2 games of the season? Because it seems like the last couple of months they've been playing the Jaguars, they've been playing the Titans, teams that they're not going to see in January. Like, what advantage does that have to have 2 top tier NFC contenders in the last 3 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it gives you a huge advantage or disadvantage. Obviously, kind of recalibrating the level of play that's expected of you is always kind of like a nice to have, but also you do have to win those games and you don't have them behind you. And so, that's like another challenge. I know that like a couple of people have kind of knocked the Vikings for having, such an easy middle of the season schedule. Of course, they had a really difficult schedule at the beginning of the season that a lot of people seem to have forgotten. And I think that they managed that just fine without having that kind of calibration phase. So I don't know it's that important or anything like that. But it's probably better than it is worse if you can't like pick and choose where your wins are, right? If they end up with enough wins, it's better that those wins ended on a kind of a high note against some pretty good teams than it is against teams that they didn't really have to focus all that much for. But I don't know, it's the NFL, right? Like we've seen 18-point underdogs beat the Vikings, right? You always have to stay focused. You always have to kind of mind your P's and Q's. It's not like Alabama taking on Mercer or anything like that. Like there's always going to be a team that even if they're really bad are going to present the kind of challenge that's really going to command your attention. So it's nice. I don't think it's that important that's kind of how that happens.
Are you surprised the Vikings are in this position?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, I guess it depends on like when you're asking the question, right? Like,
Right.
you asked me at the beginning of the season, hey, the Vikings are, gunning for the number one seed in the NFC, and they've got like a pretty reasonable shot at it too. I'd be like, get out of here, man. What did the NFC do? How did they collapse? Is Jared Goff hurt? What happened to Brock Purdy? What happened to Jalen Hurts?
Right.
I would be shocked, but that's not really what's happening. The Lions are playing well despite everyone else besides Jared Goff being hurt, I guess. The Eagles are playing well, even though I don't know if I believe them. I don't know. It's kind of a weird, but like, these are some good teams. The Rams are playing well. And the Vikings were just right there with them in the thick of it. They're doing some excellent stuff playing football on both sides of the ball. So yeah, I am surprised, but like you asked me 5 weeks ago, hey, the Vikings are going to be gunning for the number one seed 5 weeks from now. I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. That follows. They're playing well enough for that to happen.
Do you think, and two, I mean, it is kind of funny to watch everybody progressively get on the bandwagon as we got, like, even me in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, JJ McCarthy's hurt. Like, you got a couple of things going wrong here. And then they just start piling up wins. What do you think has been the biggest key to their success this season?
I think it's excellent coaching. I think that anytime that they've had a setback, they've found ways to kind of refocus the team, keep them on track, and then more importantly, or maybe not even more importantly, but also just as important, is adjust how they play in order to accommodate that. So, hey, you don't have Christian Darrisaw anymore. He might be your second best player on offense, right? How do you accommodate that? Well, one is obviously an excellent front office move to grab Cam Robinson, but two is to kind of change the way you run protection so that you don't have your left tackle out on an island anymore. You got to make sure that he's working now back in concert with everybody else. And so you're running a different set of plays. You're choosing how you're going to set up your runs. You're going to be running a little bit more under center instead of out of shotgun, because when you're running out of shotgun, you basically telegraph where you're going to run. That kind of stuff, right? And if you have Christian Darrisaw, it doesn't matter that much if you're telegraphing where you run. But if you have Cam Robinson, maybe it does. So they've adjusted a little bit. They've made sure that they've adapted to the changing circumstances of the league. So, hey, Justin Jefferson's getting triple teamed. We know we can get to Jordan Addison. So maybe, Darnold can dial it back a little bit when he sticks onto his first read and he moves on to a second read a little bit faster than he typically does. You coach that into him, right? Whenever there is a mistake, and there have been a lot of mistakes, Darnold makes a ton of stupid mistakes. It's kind of part of the deal. Whenever that happens, Kevin O'Connell says, hey, I'm not going to ask you to dial it back because the reason we're in this position is because you're aggressive enough to win games when we're out there. So go out there and continue playing the same brand of football. Don't become scared just because you threw a pick here or there. Don't become concerned just because the pocket is muddy and this time you didn't manage the pocket that well, because you'll manage it great next time. So I think that a lot of it is making sure that, to signal that you've got confidence in those players, to design plays that maximize the strength of the players that you have on the field, and to, make sure that you don't look back, that kind of thing. So I think that that's a big part of it. Also, I mean, hey, the Vikings got a little bit lucky. All good teams are.
Yeah, and I think down the stretch too. And I'm kind of jumping around here with the Vikings, just getting your opinion on how they've looked this year. I wrote about this at Zone Coverage back on Monday, and I said the Vikings have the quietest team in the NFL right now, which is impressive because you look back, I mentioned it a little bit. The Vikings had all of these loud things happen at the beginning of the year, which really in past years, they'd kind of fall down the toilet. 2021, everything was going, like, we had Kirk fighting the head coach, Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer's girlfriend was in the news. Schad was fighting everybody. Patrick Peterson was on his podcast every week. Like, well, it's not my fault. Just a lot of stuff going on, and they missed the playoffs. 2022, Ed Donatell's defense kind of does them in. 2023 was all about the contracts. This year, there was the potential for all of that with Kyrie Jackson's death, JJ McCarthy's injury, Mekhi Blackman, he gets injured in the first training camp practice. A lot of things kind of going on. Even Christian Darrisaw's injury in the middle of the season. And I think this is why Kevin O'Connell, in my mind, should be the coach of the year, because I know the Lions got off to a great start and Dan Campbell is America's sweetheart for whatever reason. But you look at the teams right now, the Lions, I feel like it's very easy to get inside Dan Campbell's head, which I don't think you would want to, like, if it was an actual physical place. I don't think you
want to live there. Yeah.
It's just, it's like one. It's like the lyrics of One just playing over and over and over again. Like, just go, bro. 4th down. Let's go. Nick Sirianni and the Eagles, it feels highly combustible. Even the Packers, like there are times, Jordan Love looks like the greatest quarterback ever. And then he also makes a boneheaded play. Like, I feel like the Vikings, they have stuff to work on, but they're the most sound team and they don't let outside things get them. And I think that when you're going into a tournament, like you're going in the next couple of weeks with the playoffs, that is so important to me. And it happens within games. It happens, with media narratives. I think the Vikings and Kevin O'Connell have done a great job of limiting that noise.
No, I think so. I think that like you mentioned, there's a lot of potential for a lot of noise to kind of spiral out of control. I think it kind of feeds on itself, though. Like, I think part of it is that it's easier to drown out noise when you're winning. And it's easier to win when you've drowned out the noise, that kind of stuff. So it kind of builds on each other a little bit, and it helps that they've won some games to kind of quiet that noise. But it also helps that, you found a way to reinstill confidence in Sam Darnold so the JJ McCarthy injury doesn't loom over the season, right? Like, there's like positive things that you've done to prevent that noise from becoming, something that kind of spirals out of control. I think that, the things that the Vikings and the Lions have for each other, have for themselves that, a lot of these other teams, except for maybe the Rams, don't have. So maybe those three teams have it, is that their coaching is so obviously authentically true to who they are and what they want to be, that it's so easy for players to buy in. You see that with the Rams a ton. You see that with the Lions, certainly, and you're seeing it with the Vikings. And I think that that's one reason why all three of these teams are overperforming their expectations. Like, I know the Lions, they made the NFC Championship game the last year, and they were favorites to win the division. But I think it's fair to say that they're still overperforming the really lofty expectations this season. Plus, again, they have like 14 injuries or something like that. So if we're talking about Coach of the Year candidates, I would think that either Kevin O'Connell or Dan Campbell winning it would make a lot of sense to me, to kind of keep these teams on track after losing somebody like Aiden Hutchinson or Christian Darrisaw, making sure that element, that unit is still really productive at what they're being asked to do is a lot, right? I think that they've both done a really good job of rehabilitating these quarterbacks that, were first round busts that couldn't really get the job done. That happened this year, obviously, for Darnold. It happened in previous years for Jared Goff. But I think that both of them have really recommended themselves really well to this kind of Coach of the Year kind of talk in ways that I guess I'm not really quite there for Matt LaFleur, which is not to say he's a bad coach. He's obviously a very good coach. Not quite there for Nick Sirianni. I actually don't know if he's a good coach. Yeah, I'm lost, right? So, like, I think that these teams have done a really good job of making sure you understand what they stand for, that the players understand what they stand for, that the players can buy into that they always adapt and they always have a plan to kind of produce, better results, and they can make sure that they can find their kinds of players available for them in free agency in the trade market or whatever in order to get that done. And we've seen that with both of these teams. And again, I think the Rams are there too. They've had a pretty atrocious start to the season, and they've kind of turned things around a little bit. So all three of those coaching staffs in the NFC have really, really impressed me a lot. And I think that the Vikings are kind of singular in their ability to make sure that they overcome some of the stuff that I think would sink a lot of other teams.
And I'm looking at the comments right now, which thanks a lot for the people who are commenting. Digits, a favorite of the show. He says schemes and themes. This team is growing like a storm. I do feel like they're playing some of their best football, especially when you see the second half of the Falcons game. I'm looking at another comment here, but do you think this team is trending in the right direction? Are they getting better as they go along, or are there things they need to improve upon?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of push and pull, right? Like I think that the front five, front four pass rush is getting a little bit better as Dallas Turner becomes a little bit bigger of a part of the operation. But I think that pass protection has declined, right? And there's nobody's fault. Christian Darrisaw got hurt. That's just going to happen, right? And that's a problem. But Sam Darnold has overcome that. So we're seeing a bunch of these 30-point games coming when we didn't get them earlier against actually honestly much weaker competition, but should have been easier to score points, and they didn't do it, right? And so there's some elements that are definitely getting better, some elements that it'd be nice if they got better, but I don't think are really doing that. Holistically, I would say that the Vikings are playing some of their best football. I will say that also that happened at the beginning of the season too. We saw a mid-season dip, which is pretty unfortunate, but they've come back, right? And so they're in a really good spot. Obviously, they need to continue that because one of the differences between the regular season and the playoffs, aside from the fact that your opponents are higher quality, is that there seems to be much more game specific or opponent specific game planning in the playoffs, right? And I don't know how much more of that advantage the Vikings can leverage because they are somewhat unique, at least defensively, at game planning and being very specific about their opponent. And so while other teams will get a little bit better in the playoffs because they'll be focusing a lot more of their energy on being really specific in how they attack the Vikings will probably be about as specific as they always are, right? And I don't know if they'll be able to gain so much more of an advantage. So there's kind of a lot of things here where it's like, hey, some of these things are better, some of these things are actually not quite as good as they need to be, but holistically, overall, the Vikings are in a really good spot. And the question for me is how much more of that can they unlock and when they enter the playoffs? And a lot of these teams are now playing their best football.
Also in the comments, Reese McCant says, "Go Vikings." He also asked, "What about the Saints?" Which I don't really know what that
I don't know
means.
what to
That's
do
kind
about
of
that. They're not
yeah.
doing so hot, so
No, he says they're better than the Villains Kings, that
which
might
I
be a game
presume
of
to mean I don't know. I presume that meant Vikings, but that's like obviously not true. Reese, can you explain yourself? This is very confusing.
Very, very much so. But maybe here's what he's doing. He's trying to figure out his underdog entry for this weekend because underdog is the place to play if you're a sports fan looking to win money while watching sports with over 5 million happy players and $2 billion won. Underdog makes it fun and easy to cash in on all of your favorite athletes' performances. Compete against other players by selecting higher or lower with Underdog. Underdog is the best place to cash in on all of your football takes this season. Which players are going off? Which ones are ice cold? Make your entries in just a few taps. Turn your sports opinions into real money. Underdog also has vulture protection. If you also have a designated running back to score a touchdown in your pick'em entry and they get vultured, they will rescue your entry. And Underdog has a game known as Red Zone Rush, a game you will not find anywhere else. Just pick whether or not a player will score a touchdown by swiping right for yes or left for no. It's as simple as that. Plus, your entry will automatically be boosted and you'll get a 51% profit boost when you play. I've been an Underdog player for a few years now. Maybe Reese is as well. Maybe he wants to take some hires on the Vikings as they go to Seattle this week, some lowers on the Saints this weekend as well. You pick two of those, you can win some money. All you got to do, download the app today, use the code The Age, you get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Again, download the app today, use the code The Age. It's all one word. You get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Just select higher or lower on your favorite players and cash in on Underdog. You must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply, void in Colorado. If you are concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. That's 1-800-639-8783 or text NEXT STEP to 53342. And in New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. All right. Let's get back to the Seattle Seahawks. Let me mix this in here because it just has a good question. Now I see it. Clay Campbell, you were just talking about the pass rush. There's a rumor he's going to get released when the Dolphins get bounced so he could go chase a ring. Do you like Campbell on this team or what do you think?
And I don't hate it. I think that one of the things is that the Vikings, like that's kind of one area where the Vikings don't really have a lot of like, let's say open slots, right? They don't have like an injury there that they need to take over, but obviously, Campbell's probably going to be better than Jerry Tillery, who I don't want to knock, has actually been playing some pretty good football. Jalen Redmond, same thing, has been playing really outstanding football. I think Calais Campbell's probably better than those guys even at the tail end of his career. So it is still probably an upgrade. Is it an upgrade kind of worth the amount of money that he'll cost? Probably. But it's not one that I'm like super passionate about. I think it's a good idea. I'd be kind of excited if they did. I wouldn't be surprised though if he signed with like the Detroit Lions, who definitely need a little bit more help in terms of pass rush up front, especially on passing downs. So I think that and what they already have like Zadarius Smith, right? They're doing like a ton of and so it wouldn't shock me if he ends up in the division but playing for somebody else. I don't know. Calais Campbell would be a good fit. It seems unlikely to me that he would sign necessarily with the Vikings because other organizations in a slightly better spot might need him a little bit more.
Well, Brian Anderson also makes a good point in the chat. He goes, great idea having a Seattle expert on the show for those extra insight. That is exactly
all right.
When I was discussing with Adam Patrick who I should have on the show. He's like, Arif has something going on with Seattle. And then I'm like, yeah, he does. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, I don't know what it is, but he's so let's ask this. What is your affiliation with the Seattle Seahawks? Because
I don't have any. The whole deal is that there's this joke that I'm secretly a Seahawks fan or something. And it's because, a long time ago when the Seahawks were signing a bunch of former Vikings, remember Antoine Winfield, Kevin Williams, DeForest Jackson, I think like Heath Farwell, like a ton, right? Percy Harvin, I didn't even mention him. I decided to write a couple of pieces about those players or some of the more high-profile players for Field Goals, the SB Nation blog associated with the Seattle Seahawks. I did that, and I just continued writing pieces about the Seattle team for them because I was breaking down all these former Vikings, and so people started this rumor, and then the guy running the site, who's now I think he's with the Ringer now, Danny Kelly. He was running the site. He was promoting the piece, and I turned on like my automatic tweets from that article, and so he tweeted from his perspective how much he liked the piece, and he is a Seahawks fan, right? And so he tweets his thing, and it goes out on my Twitter too. So it looks like I'm a Seahawks fan. This is a whole deal. They crowdfunded a trip to me to like watch the Seahawks game. I think in 2013. Again, it was like this whole deal. And the more I resist this characterization, the more Seahawks Twitter has fun with it. So they have now claimed that, and they've claimed for like it seems like a decade now, that I'm secretly a part of Seahawks Twitter. I'm secretly a Seahawks fan. We have fun with it though. We're fundraising for a Seattle nonprofit. You can check that over at wildleft.football for the Lavender Rights Project. So turning this into something that's been kind of positive has been a really fun kind of twist on this little concept. But yeah, I have no more affinity for the Seahawks than anybody else. It's just Seattle Twitter has decided to adopt me because 11, 12 years ago, I wrote a couple of pieces for their fan blog.
It's like the sci-fi movie where, they stumble upon a different planet and fire or whatever. And like, you're like, this guy, he knows about Heath Farwell. Speaking of Heath Farwell, I think he was on the team the last time the Vikings won in Seattle. Let's move on to our Vikings Seahawks preview. It's 3:05 kickoff at Lumen Field in Seattle. Adam Amin, Mark Sanchez, and Christina Pink will be on the call for Fox. Vikings currently favored by 3 points as of Thursday's afternoon. And as a Seattle Seahawks expert, I guess I have to ask, why does weird stuff always happen to the Vikings when they go to Seattle? Because they haven't won there since 2006 when Chester Taylor went off. My first memory of playing in Seattle was Sean Alexander going off for 5 touchdowns in the first half of that game, by the way. Not a lot of good stuff has happened there since. You had the final game of the John DeFilippo era. Alexander Madison missed a hole the size of a semi-trailer in 2020. Harrison Smith considered murdering Cam Dantzler on live television later in that game. I mean, what is with the Vikings and Seattle?
I mean, well, first of all, I don't think any jury would have convicted Harrison Smith. But second,
that was a bad play by Cam Dantzler. Yes.
Yeah. The second thing is like a lot of the time, Seattle had when the Vikings have been playing in Seattle, a lot of times that Seattle team was really outstanding. It's like Legion of Boom stuff, right? That was back when Russell Wilson was good for Seattle. Like it's been a bit since they played in Seattle, and a lot of those teams were really good Seattle teams. So that's like part of it, right? Part of it is that the Vikings have been up and down, in terms of their quality. So some of those teams have been really good, some of those teams haven't. Again, that Alexander Madison one, they were basically on the verge of winning. They just needed one more yard. They couldn't get it. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's just like a big part of it. The Vikings at the time were struggling in prime time. I think that that's just happenstance. I think that also happens to be true. So I don't want to like blame the fact that it was prime time, but like away games are tough. Away games in Seattle are particularly tough. Now home field advantage means a lot less than it used to. Now it's about like 1.5 to 2 points. Back then it was like 3 points. Like these small changes, and in Seattle, it seems like it was 3.5, 4 points, right? So it seems like these small changes have all contributed to the reasons that the Vikings have kind of struggled in Seattle. But I don't think that'll necessarily continue. I don't think that Seattle is nearly as good of a team as they were then, right? We can see that in kind of the records that they've had. Not to disrespect Geno Smith, who looks like he'll be playing. He's been playing outstanding football, not to disrespect any of those receivers, but like those like 2013, 2015, even 2017 Seattle teams were like really extremely good. And so that it's just like tough to win in that environment.
It's like in the end, I think home field advantage or home court advantage in this case matters in the NBA, right? Like if you go and you play, Michael Jordan in the Bulls in the United Center in the mid 90s, you're going to have a bad time, right? It's like going to Seattle, you got the 12s, you got Russell Wilson, you got action. You're like, man, those are bright uniforms. I don't know. Oh, wow, we're down 21-0. Little things like that. It just seems like a house of horrors. But then you also mentioned too, this is not as good as those Seattle teams of the past. Watching them against Green Bay, watching Toyota-thon, Jordan Love tear them up. It seemed like they got what they wanted. And I don't know. I mean, Geno Smith is going to play. It sounds like it anyway. But with that knee injury with Sam Howell behind him, I don't think the task is as intimidating as it's been in years past.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think so. Again, you can't like overlook this game. The Vikings are, I think, only quote unquote only 3-point favorites, but 3-point favorites on the road in Seattle actually is somewhat significant.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just they're not as good as like these really good, Russell Wilson teams. Back when Shaq Griffin was playing for them and he was a Pro Bowl guy, right? I think it was like Trey Flowers was also up there, like also playing. Like, they had like some really good players on defense, and now it's like, well, I don't want to like knock Devin Witherspoon, who's like an outstanding young player. I don't want to knock some of these players, but like, that team didn't have a Josh Jobe that you could kind of exploit, right? That team always had really good linebackers. Now I'm not so sure. That team always had good pass rushers. Now I'm not so sure. So it just seems like this team doesn't really have quite as many of the high quality players that they had in the past. You still have to watch out for like Byron Murphy, right? You still have to watch out for Leonard Williams, who's off and on, right? But there's just a lot more opportunity here. The Vikings do seem like a higher quality team, which in most of those circumstances they just weren't. So it's a different environment.
Digits brings up a good point, and it kind of parlays into what I'm going to talk about next. He said time of position may cost the Vikings. This late season exhaustion is real. And one of the notes that I have is whether the Vikings can stop the run on Sunday. They're actually the number one defense in terms of EPA per rush in the NFL, which is crazy because people have talked a lot about the rushing defense in the latest weeks. But the last game without Ivan Pace Jr., this should be it. He's a top 10 run defender according to PFF's run defender grades. 105.2 yards per game over the last 4 would still be a top 10 run defense. And Seattle is actually one of the least run heavy teams in the league at 329 carries, and they're 28th in rushing yards per game. But they have the horses to run the ball. You're starting Geno Smith at less than 100%, it sounds like. Or if he can't go, Sam Howell, who has 2 options. He either takes a sack or he throws an interception. Can the Vikings stop the run in this game? And how important do you think it will be?
Well, it does depend, because you said that Seattle has the horses. It depends on if the horses are available, right? Because Kenneth Walker's hurt. Zach Charbonnet did not participate in the most recent on Wednesday in practice. I don't think we've seen the Thursday practice report yet. It isn't out yet. But Both of those running backs are banged up. There was a question whether or not Kenneth Walker would play the last game. And so they're not at 100% either. And I think that that's pretty significant, right? Because that offensive line is not, playing, their best football in either pass protection or run blocking. And so a lot of it's fallen onto those running backs to create those yards on their own. And when Kenneth Walker is healthy, he can do that, but it just seems like that's not necessarily the case. I think a lot of times when we look at the Vikings rush defense numbers, um, you know, I think we've already gotten used to how good the Vikings have been at stopping the run. So when we see like DeAndre Swift run for 9 yards, we all throw up our hands like, God, I can't believe they gave up a 9-yard run. Every team gives up 9-yard runs, right?
Yeah.
The Vikings happen to do it a lot less than other teams, but we're so used to them not doing it at all that we get kind of upset. Like you said, they're number one in EPA per play. Teams are running the ball a lot against the Vikings because it turns out throwing the ball like a ton of teams did at the beginning of the season, right? Because at the beginning of the season, the Vikings were like 25th in passing yards per game, but like third in EPA per dropback, right? Like they were allowing a ton of passing yards, but it was hurting teams to do that. They're trying to come back from behind and stuff like that. Now the Vikings are in a position where they're not coming out to like 4-score leads in the first half, so teams don't feel like they have to pass the ball. So they are running the ball a lot more often, and it's just scary to throw the ball against the Vikings. And so they are, and so like a lot of these runs aren't really helping their opponents that much. Occasionally, you get that 9-yard, maybe even a 12-yard run, but a lot of them are 2-yard runs, tackles for loss, etc. I'm not concerned about the run defense. I think the run defense is very good. I think the fact that Jalen Redmond's getting more snaps is, good for the run defense. I think the fact that Dallas Turner's getting better at defending the run and seeing more snaps is good for the run defense. The fact that Patrick Jones is healthy again, seemingly, is good for the run defense. He's probably the best run defending edge defender that they have. So yeah, you don't have Ivan Pace. That sucks. But you got Blake Cashman back. He's outstanding. So I'm not that concerned about it. As soon as I say that, Kenneth Walker will not only be healthy, he'll go for 150. But for the most part, I think that the Vikings have just a really stellar run defense, despite the fact that the whole defensive scheme seems to be oriented around disrupting the quarterback. It also happens to tack on well to the way that you would attack the run defense. In fact, over at Wide Left Out Football, we got Luke Braun writing a piece on the Vikings defense. Part 1 was about the run defense and why it's so good. So I encourage people to check that out.
And also, too, I was about to mention Luke Braun because I was listening to his podcast, Locked On Vikings, this morning. And the Seahawks podcaster had mentioned that Ryan Grubb has basically refused to run the ball under any circumstances. Their offensive line is bad in Seattle. Geno Smith's getting sacked all the time. They can't throw downfield because very similar to what the Vikings do. They just want to throw the ball downfield all the time, but they just don't have time to do it. And they still do it no matter what. Whereas, Kevin O'Connell on Monday, he threw, I think it was like he had a 3-to-1 pass to run ratio at some point after like 40 plays. And then he's like, all right, let's give the ball to Aaron Jones. And
fine, we'll run the ball.
You win. But I mean, it feels like that's what Seattle should do. They should try and run the ball. But like you said, that's the number one, the best part of the Vikings defense. So it's hard to attack them. I guess looking at the Seattle team, is there anything that concerns you going into Sunday?
I think that outside of like Josh Jobe, who I just kind of dug down a little bit, Reek Woolen and Devin Witherspoon are very good players. I would take the Vikings receivers against any cornerback group, but this is one of the better ones that I think a lot of people aren't talking about that they're going up against, that are really physical, that do a really good job of kind of disrupting people at the catch point. Jordan Addison has been playing really, really well, but I don't know that he's played against the style of cornerback that Seattle tends to employ that really do a great job of like disrupting people. I mean, because he is a smaller receiver, right? So, I mean, those are concerns for sure. I think that Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy up front, those are concerns for sure. So like Seattle defensively, like those 4 players are the ones I'm probably paying the most attention to in terms of like the ones that have the ability to disrupt the Vikings plans the most. Then offensively, I mean, that's just a really good receiving group, right? You've got 2 really good crafty route runners in Lockett and Jackson Smith and Jigba. You've got a physical freak in DK Metcalf, and you can, play around with how you punish opposing defenses for focusing on one element of their player or the other. Metcalf, he's not having the season that he had like 3 years ago or anything like that, but he can go off for 150 yards easily in a game, right? Lockett can do the same thing. We just saw Jackson Smith and Jigba do it like a couple weeks ago. So it's a really, really good receiving group, and I don't know that the Vikings cornerbacks can keep up, and so it's going to be on the Vikings defensive line or the pass rush really up against that offensive line. not a good offensive line, but we saw against the Bears, not just last week, but a couple weeks ago, that sometimes a really good pass rush against a really bad offensive line doesn't necessarily mean you are stopping the offense. It just means that they're going to change what they do offensively to avoid this very obvious matchup problem, which, maybe the Seahawks do that. They run a bunch of tunnel screens to DK Metcalf or something. I don't know. So I do have concerns, but the Vikings are a better team.
The other thing that I'm thinking about just sitting here is Byron Murphy the second. I had to think about that for. I feel bad for Byron Murphy Jr. because anything that comes out about the other guy is immediately attached to him.
He's had to say things a couple of times about that too. He's like, "That's not me."
Yeah. I think the Byron Murphy the second sent a whole bunch of questionable texts, and he had to come out like, "No, that's not me." And then an NFL.com intern put him in the rookie in
the graphic,
and it's just been kind of crazy. But Byron Murphy the second, he was a prospect the Vikings loved coming out of Texas. Big defensive lineman, can be disruptive. Him against that interior offensive line of the Vikings, they've done enough. They've done enough to get him to this point, but Dalton Reisner, Garrett Bradbury, and Blake Brandel, those three guys against Byron Murphy the second, they're going to have to hold their water, because if they get blown up on the inside, that's going to create a lot of problems for Sam Darnold, who likes to sit back there. He likes to look downfield, and he likes to have those big gains. I believe, Alec Lewis of The Athletic had a very nice article comparing the Vikings numbers to previous Super Bowl champions, and the Vikings explosive play rate in the past was
it's like higher. 18% is higher than all of them. Yeah.
Yes. Higher than all of them, dating back to 2010 or 2012, whenever he did. It's at least been 10 or 15 years. So, they need to keep Byron Murphy away from Sam Darnold. Byron Murphy the second, not the corner. That'd be weird if he was playing both ways for both teams, but you know what I mean. I think that's going to be key, because if he wrecks the game in the middle, you're going to have a bad time, and this will wind up being a closer game than it should be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wonder how much of the communication errors along that interior offensive line have been resolved, because it's been a huge issue for the past 2-3 weeks. And it's not just like Dalton Reisner, right? Actually, the bigger problem has been about how Blake Brandel coordinates between Cam Robinson and Garrett Bradbury, especially as, like I mentioned earlier in the show, you've changed the left tackle's responsibilities in recognition of the fact that this is definitely not Christian Darrisaw. And so there has to be kind of a stronger relationship between the left tackle and left guard. And that's created a lot of problems. Against some teams, this resulted in a lot of blitzing, right? But against other teams, it means that they're not picking up stunts or twists nearly as often. Byron Murphy is an incredibly athletic player, the defensive tackle. He's an incredibly athletic player. And so we might see some stunts and twists targeting Blake Brandel. We might see that athleticism be put to use against Dalton Reisner, who's not as athletic as a player as his testing would indicate. There are matchup problems here, both just in terms of, hey, we've got a struggling unit and we've got a good player, but also the way that player succeeds takes advantage of the specific weaknesses along this offensive line. So they're going to need to find some way to make sure that they communicate a little bit better in the 2.5 seconds that they have every snap, in order to kind of make sure that the pocket is clean and stuff like that. Because like you said, the Vikings offense is built around Darnold getting to hold on to the ball. I think that it depends on who's doing the counting, because like PFF is a different number, the Next Gen Stats is a different number than ESPN. But regardless of what the actual number is, Sam Darnold ranks second, third, or fourth, depending on how you play with minimums and all that, in time spent in pocket, right? And this excludes like the ones where you're scrambling around the pocket and stuff like that. It's just time spent in pocket before you throw the ball. He just likes holding on to the ball. And that is not a him thing, because he actually held on to the ball a lot less in Carolina, San Francisco, and even with the Jets. It's a Kevin O'Connell thing, because Kirk Cousins held the ball on the longest in a Vikings uniform than he did with Atlanta, or in the Zimmer era, or in Washington, right? So that's a Kevin O'Connell thing. And that's just the way the offense is designed. And if that's the case, you need to account for people like Byron Murphy II, right? And if you don't, you're going to have a huge problem. Aaron Jones has been all right in pass protection. There have been a couple more mistakes these past couple of weeks. I'm not concerned about them, but Cam Akers does concern me in pass protection. He's missing his assignments, and when he doesn't, he gets bowled over a lot easier. So there's a lot of elements here that the Vikings need to make sure that they've dialed up appropriately, because it would not shock me if the Seahawks played closer to the way, McDonald organized the Baltimore defense a couple of years ago and blitzed a little bit more than they blitz right now, just to take advantage of these particular weaknesses.
Yes, they can't have Mike McDonald play Yamo wreck your offense.
Yeah.
Yes, so that was a very bad yacht rock joke, but we'll just move on from there. Prediction time: Vikings, Seahawks, Sunday. Who you got?
Vikings, I think they cover. In fact, I think on the football party, I took them -3, so I hope they cover. Um, but yeah, I think that there's always a weakness in that coverage unit, and the Vikings are better receiver versus cornerback, and I think that they're just going to continue to be explosive on offense. Obviously, Aaron Jones better not fumble. Sam Darnold only gets to throw one pick, that kind of stuff, right? But yeah, I think the Vikings are more than 3 points better than this team, even when they're on the road.
Do you guys still do the punishment thing for your picks?
Yeah, the punishment this year is someone has to do a live. Someone has to do the third day of the draft live on the channel, and whoever loses has to do it. It looks like it's going to be Sam, who seems like he's probably the least equipped out of the four of us to have to do it. So good luck, Sam. And we're brainstorming an additional punishment because Sam is in the negative, and so we need an additional punishment for when you're in the negative, because everyone starts with $1,000, right?
Yeah.
Sam is at 0, and he just bet 200, I think, or something like that. So he's going to be in the negative almost certainly, depending on how tonight goes for him. And so we need a punishment on top of that. We already did the hot sauce stuff last year, so we're gonna have to come up with some.
A punishment on top of the punishment.
Yeah.
I know, and I mean, this is I'm not big on the whole, oh, you got to go to a Waffle House and like if you eat a pancake,
24 hours, yeah.
But like there was another one that seemed like way more fun. It was you had to go to a bar for 24 hours. You might have saw this, but it was like a Bears fan. You had to go to a bar for 24 hours and you had to stay the entire until bar close, unless like you took a drink. So you could like blitzkrieg it and like be done at 3 p.m, but like it would.
But now you can't go home.
Yeah, exactly.
You're just like, you walk out and you fall over, right? Yeah.
And like other people, like the best part was other people too heard about it. They were just out on a Saturday and they're just like, here's a beer, here's a shot, here's whatever. So, I mean, it seemed like the most fun idea you could think of for a punishment. My prediction, Vikings, Seahawks. You said you take the 3. I would agree with that. I think it's going to be a 2-score game. I feel like Seattle's a good team. I know Lumen Field is a house of horrors. It could easily go be a 1-score game. But I also think that the Vikings are the better team right now. They have the better weapons offensively. This could be a huge TJ Hawkinson game, I think, even though you do have Devin Witherspoon and the rest of the Seattle corners on the outside. I think Hawkinson could be that guy open. And I also think Aaron Jones could have a decent game if the Vikings are willing to run the ball. So I think I'm going to go 27-13 Vikings.
27-13. That's quite the drubbing. Yeah. They're not hitting the 30-point streak anymore, though. So that's something to note. But yeah. Man, holding them to 13 would be great, and probably a good indication that Geno Smith is banged up. But
I think that's what's holding me back. I mean, last week I said the Vikings would win 38-7, so I'm chugging purple. Like for years, I'm like, I am not picking the Vikings beyond a score because I know how this game ends. And this will probably be a 1-score game, but I just think there's that big of a discrepancy between the two teams right now. So
yeah, no, for sure.
What's going on at Wide Left? You mentioned the Wide Left Substack. You mentioned the Lavender Project. What's going on with all that stuff, and where can people follow you on social?
Yeah, so Wide Left Football is where all my written work is. I also host a lot of Luke Braun's written work, so we do a bunch of film breakdowns, statistical analysis. I've got a couple of pieces up there. Braun has a piece on Dallas Turner, who is doing a much better job than I think a lot of people, and Luke also thinks, a much better job than a lot of people are imagining based off of like things like a snap count and a sack count. I've got a piece about how we got to stop paying attention to like 1-score games because we've got much better tools to determine how close a game is. And the Vikings have actually not played in that many close games. So that piece is up. Again, I mentioned the Lavender Rights Project. They're a civil rights group that focuses on, queer people of color and kind of the way that rights discourse is operated, specifically in Seattle. So to celebrate Seattle Week, raising money for them. Luke Braun also has an almanac of the Vikings defense. So there's a part 1, part 2 on run defense and coverage. And there's a bunch more stuff. You can find that all over there. You can find me on socials on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL, on Blue Sky at arif.bsky.social. It's just Arif. So I got in early enough that I could just have my first name. Felt like a power move. But yeah, and then I'm not really like technically I have Threads, I think, Arif Hasan. I haven't posted there in weeks. So, whatever. But I don't really use that many other socials. So not really Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, anything like that. So it's just those two.
It used to be easy. It used to be, all right, I'm just going to post it on Twitter and
my
Facebook,
Twitter, and we'll go. And then now.
I made this joke often. I know you're an office guy. I think there was an episode where Ryan, I can't think of his last name on the show, but when he was in the closet, like that was his office. He came up with the idea. It was called a WUF, WUPF. And you would send something, it would go across all of your social accounts. Plus it would like call someone and send a fax and like that's what we're trending towards. We're all going to send WUFs in like 5 years, and fax machines are coming back, man. But Arif, thank you for coming on. This is the Viking Age podcast. You can follow Arif at Arif Hasan NFL. I am Chris Schad. I'm at The Real Chris Schad on all of those social media platforms. We do this every Monday with a late week episode right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. For Arif Hasan, I am Chris Schad. This has been the Viking Age podcast.